My name's Gordon Dedman and I'm the Senior Instructor at Bushcraft Survival Australia, which is an outdoor bushcraft survival school dedicated to teaching genuine and authentic bushcraft skills, both modern and traditional in Australia. I'm also an Australian Army survival instructor, and I'm a survival instructor in North Force, which is a regional force surveillance unit in Northern Australia. And we operate all through the north. We have a large Aboriginal contingent of soldiers in our unit. We work in remote areas of Northern Australia, and survival plays a big part in what we do. Concurrently, I am a combat survival instructor and SEER qualified, which is Survive, Evade, Resist and Escape. And I teach combat survival at the Combat Survival Training School in Townsville. So between the two I do a mix. And on top of all that, I'm the survival and bushcraft consultant for the TV series Alone Australia. Well, my first thoughts on the Morakniv Garberg Grand was, when I first saw it just this morning, was wow. It's initially loved the colour, loved the beautiful leather sheath. I'm glad that there's not the flip lid on this, which is a feature I really like. The knife is longer than the original Garberg, and the profile is more in line with the heavy duty companion, which is one of my favourite knives. And so that's fantastic straight off. It's full tang, the feel is great. It's a little bit longer, but it's not too long. It's actually really nice. It feels great, solid, still the full tang as we have in the original Garberg. But the blade profile I think is going to be fantastic, especially for skinning and things like that, and also sharpening. And it's the same thickness, and it's great. And of course we have the stainless steel version as well. As I said, the leather sheath is beautiful. I love the dark brown colour, and the stitching. It's very good workmanship. And we even have a plastic sheath inside, which is going to I suppose it's just actually going to keep it for moisture, and just looking after the edge a little bit better, and the leather sheath. Fantastic, and I really can't wait until I can actually start using it. The difference between bushcraft and survival, it's can be a thorny question, but generally speaking, and this probably applies to all parts of the world, in my opinion, survival is an emergency where bushcraft isn't. Survival is getting out of a situation and back to safety as fast as possible, with little or no regard to the environment. Pretty much survival at all costs, in which location and rescue is the main difference. And it's more equipment based, where bushcraft on the other hand is the bigger picture that survival comes from. Survival just being a small part of the bigger picture of bushcraft, where bushcraft has its roots all in Indigenous skills. They're the same skill sets as survival, but I feel that bushcraft has a deeper philosophical connection to the environment. It's a much deeper connection to the environment. And it is based around knowledge and skills with less reliance on equipment. There are some modern items of equipment within bushcraft, but it's more about knowledge and skills. And it is not an emergency. So where survival is get out of the bush and back to safety through being rescued or self-rescue as fast as possible, where bushcraft is about staying in the one area and living harmoniously within that area with a more defined and deeper philosophical connection to the environment you're in. That is probably similar around the world. What would change for me being in Australia is the environment you're in would change. For example, we have lots of hot, arid areas in Australia where water is of primary importance. and the order we use a thing called the PLAN acronym, which is known around the world. PLAN being PLAN. P stands for protection, which is first aid, clothing, shelter and fire. The L stands for location, which is attracting, holding and directing attention. The A stands for acquisition of water, then food. And the N stands for navigation, which is travel, orientation and direction. So they're our list of priorities. So in Australia, water's right up there, being able to find water and making it safe to drink. But of course, shelter, beginning with your clothing, is absolutely essential to understand about. But we also have cold areas in Australia where it snows. It's quite chilly now. And so being able to get yourself out of the elements and keep your core body temperature warm is very, very important, because it doesn't matter what environment you're in, that's survival is about keeping your core body temperature warm. So in Australia, the differences between bushcraft and survival remain the same, in my opinion. It's just the priorities of what you need to address first will need to change after first aid is considered. And there are no first aid issues. Your next issue is your clothing, which hopefully you've dressed for the environment correctly, whether a hot environment or a cold environment. And then the next priority is shelter. Shelter will always trump everything. Shelter and fire go together, because if you can't manage your core body temperature with your clothing or your shelter, then you only have fire to do that. And then once those things are taken care of, then we look at water. And then last of all, in the survival priorities in a short term, 72-hour survival situation, the last of priorities is food. But certainly exposure, shelter and water are the most important things first. In an arid environment, water is paramount in Australia. But that general rule occurs in no matter where you would be. But that's my opinion on the sort of the genuine difference between bushcraft and survival. My top 3 to 5 items I would choose for survival in probably most environments, including the Australian bush, would be other than the clothing on my back, and clothing is always number one. So having appropriate clothing for the environment you're going to is paramount. But other than clothing, number one is going to be some form of cutting tool. Something to be able to cut. So ideally a good fixed blade knife that enables me to carve, make fire with it, construct shelters, because if I don't have a knife I need to find and be able to flint knap tools. So some form of cutting tool is of absolute paramount importance. Next, I would be some form of combustion device, a ferrocerium rod for making fire, which gives me fire everywhere. It doesn't give me flame, it gives me sparks. So I need to create the tinder to take a spark, because obviously with fire then I can look after all my other survival needs, because fire gives us warmth, light, it enables us to boil water, it enables us to cook our food, fire hardened tools, dry things, preserve food, and it's a great source of morale. Fire is the equivalent of electricity. So some form of combustion device. If I don't have that, then I have to look to nature to make friction fire and things like that, which of course is possible, but it's a lot harder. So number 2 is some form of combustion device, say in the form of, say, a ferrocerium rod. Number 3 would be some form of covering. So, and that could be a shelter. So that could be a poncho, it could be a tarp, or what we call in Australia is an Australian Army hoochie, is what we use in the military. So some form of shelter to keep out the elements, to keep you dry, to keep you warm, particularly if you don't have the right clothing. So really important. More people perish because of lack of exposure. So a shelter is paramount. If you don't have shelter material, then you have to look to the environment by making a natural shelter, and that depends on the resources in that area. So shelter or a covering of some description would be number 3. Number 4 would be some form of container to hold water, to be able to boil water, to make water safe to drink or to cook our food. So making a container in nature can be very, very time consuming. So most of the time we take for granted the importance of a container. Very time consuming to make if you don't have it, but you can make containers through coal burn bowls or making bowls, but you need to be able to boil water through hot rock boiling. So a container would be my next choice because they take a lot to make. And lastly, one of the most, of course, by no means the least, there are other items you'd take, but I'd be wanting some form of cordage. Cordage holds everything together. And with cordage such as parachute cord, I've got cordage that can be broken down into smaller fibres for tying things together, for fishing line, for trap making materials, for a host of other things. If you don't have cordage, you need to make cordage from the environment using reverse wrap twists. All possible, but of course it's time consuming. So they would be my top 3 to 5 items that I would always take in addition to having the correct clothing for that environment. In the Australian context, one of the underrated, not certainly the only one, but one of the underrated skills I find in Australia that people struggle with or don't do, and that is the correct way to purify water. Now, Australia, some environments, particularly in the dry, arid centre, when there's not much water, when you find water, it's not clean like this. It's dirty, it might be a pig wallow, and a lot of people are put off drinking water from that because it's dirty or there's a dead animal in it. And they don't realise that all they need to do is filter that water, coarse filtration will get rid of the turbidity and the particulate matter. Then all they need to do is boil that water. And boiling gets rid of 99% of all waterborne pathogens except chemicals. And there have been people in the Australian outback that have died because they simply didn't want to drink the water because it looked yucky and had stuff in it. And they died as a result, when all they needed to do was filter it to get rid of the turbidity, boil it for 1 minute at the rolling boil at sea level is all you need to do. And that would have got rid of all organic pathogens, the main 5 pathogens being turbidity, which is through coarse filtration, parasites, protozoa, bacteria, viruses and chemicals. Boiling doesn't get rid of chemicals, but in an outback or right in the middle of the bush, chemicals are usually associated with man-made influence. That's one of the biggest areas I find people are unsure about. That sounds very simple, but people do balk at knowing how to do that, and really they don't realise that that's all it takes to make water safe to drink. Mightn't taste the best, but you could improve the taste of that water just by adding or straining the filtered water again through charcoal, and that's one way that we can improve the taste of water. Another underrated skill that I think is a problem, which I have seen not just in when we get students on our Bushcraft Survival Australia courses, but one of the things I also see with some of the contestants that try out for a loan, being the survival consultant for the program, is that people seem to struggle with being able to put up a simple shelter, a tarp shelter, knowing their knots, being able to achieve tension and angularity so that a shelter can shed water. And I see people struggle to set those up in a hurry. And in a real emergency, you only have minutes before you need to get a shelter up to either protect a fire or protect yourself against rain and wind. And so knowing your knots and a few simple knots and being able to tie them in the dark and with your eyes closed is really, really important. So I see people struggle with that because they haven't practiced things under pressure. You need to practice things under pressure. And the same goes for fire lighting as well, being able to light a fire under all situations, under all conditions. If you haven't practiced lighting a fire in the wet and the cold, then you're going to struggle. So you need to be able to erect a shelter with simple knots and good tension and angularity, as well as being able to make fire under all conditions. And you need to practice that way so that when you need to do it for real, you're going to struggle less, and that's important. So there's two extra skills, if you will, that I think are underrated, that need lots of extra practice. My top 3 bushcraft tips. Well, knowing the difference between bushcraft and survival. Obviously survival is emergency where bushcraft is not. If it was a survival tip, it would be telling someone where you're going and when you'll be back, and have an emergency plan if you're not. Taking with you the correct items, obviously bleeding with your clothing, and having a container, combustion device, shelter, cordage, and a few other compass, and you'd also have some form of GPS or locating device, PLB, to get you out of trouble. Rescue being the difference between survival and bushcraft, being back to safety. All of those things are important. And of course, knowing how to use your equipment is of paramount importance, having a good knowledge of heat loss gain mechanisms. If you have a knowledge of those, which are conduction, convection, radiation, evaporation and respiration, knowing how the body loses heat and gains heat is paramount to good survival, because then your shelter depends on it, your clothing depends on knowing those things. So in a survival situation, that's paramount. As far as bushcraft tips concerned, the top things I would say is being able to use a knife safely, being able to use a site cut safely so you're not going to be a harm to yourself, know how to carve, know how to use a knife with a ferro rod, all that. So knife safety and usage and knowing different grips is essential. That'll be number 1. Being able to bushcraft, this would apply to survival as well, is being able to make a fire under all conditions, practicing with different tinder, in the wet, in the cold, with different resources, being able to make a fire at any time, because we know the importance of fire and what fire gives us. It's our electricity. So being able to make a fire would be number 2, absolutely essential to do that. And number 3, as far as a bushcraft tip, would be having some, having some good cooking skills, but being able to cook without pots, being able to cook with minimal equipment, indigenous cooking, all those things are really, really important, to be able to do things without having to take extra equipment into the bush with you. Bushcraft is about knowledge and skills, and the more you know, the less you have to carry. But of course, there's many other things as well, such as navigation, being able to navigate not just with a compass and find direction and find your way about. Navigation is, of course, another paramount skill, which is also a survival skill. But being able to read the sun, of which there isn't any today, the stars, and being able to navigate naturally is really, really important. Being able to find your way in the bush. It's sometimes hard just to nail it down to 3 only, because they're all intertwined. But they were just some of the top tips I'd recommend learning, and those skills. One thing I've learnt from the Australian wilderness, and I'm sure it applies in other parts of the world, is never take the weather for granted or other things for granted, because it is so changeable. In Central Australia, you can have temperatures that are 40 degrees during the day and freezing at night in the desert. And that temperature differential is huge. And if you're not dressed appropriately, or you've got the clothing to accommodate that temperature differential, it can be a real problem, and people perish because of that. Most people think Australia's hot, but there's quite cold parts where it snows in Australia. And it could be a nice sunny day, and the weather changes suddenly, depending on where you are, up in the mountain areas particularly, and it gets down to freezing. And many people have perished in areas of Australia because they went out equipped just for the day only, for a 3-hour walk, dressed for the conditions of the day. And through military survival, we teach air crews to dress for the ground, not the air, which means that you need to be prepared for anything that can happen. So if the weather changes suddenly, you need to have the appropriate clothing and shelter to protect you against those elements. Because if you've only got the clothes on your back because you took for granted the way the weather was, that can lead to some really big issues. So yeah, don't take the weather for granted, and make sure you're prepared with the clothing to have the breadth to keep you warm and dry and keep out the wind, no matter what the weather may throw at you.